Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline and I create knitting content here on YouTube. So today in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make these cabled mittens. So the steps I'm going to go through is first I'm going to show you how to cast on using the long tail cast on method. Then once we've done that, we're going to join in the round and use magic loop to knit these mittens. So first we're going to do the 2x2 rib, we're going to do an increase round, and then we're going to begin working the cabling as well as the thumb increases. We're going to continue doing the cabling and divide off for the thumb so that we can split up the mitten, finish the cabling, then work the decreasing and do a Kitchener stitch bind off at the top of the mitten. Then we're going to go back and pick up those thumb stitches that we'd placed on the waste yarn and finish off the thumb. So now most of the steps are the same between the two mittens, but of course there's going to be a step where we increase on the opposite side, but I'll mention anywhere where there's a difference between the two and describe the different steps that I did for this right hand mitten at the end of the video. Down in the description box below you're going to find the full written version of this pattern, and you're also going to find the video breakpoints for each individual step that I just mentioned. So that way if you're just looking for a specific step, you can go exactly to that point, or if you need to rewatch a step again, you know exactly how far back to go. Thank you so much for checking out my tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and if you have any questions along the way, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Starting off with the knitting needles for this project, we're going to need two different sizes, and I'll be demonstrating how to knit these mittens using the magic loop technique. And during this project, I'm going to be knitting them one at a time. A common question that I get a lot is, can you knit mittens two at a time? And the answer is yes, but the reason I'm just knitting one at a time for this project is because one of the sides is cabled. So it becomes a little more complicated to knit them two at a time. So first for the smaller knitting needle, this is a size US 7, and it's attached to a 24-inch cord. You can use a cord that's longer than 24 inches. I just wouldn't recommend going smaller than that, because then it makes it harder to do magic loop. And then my second needle size is a US 8, and again this has a 24-inch cord on it, and again you can go longer than 24 inches, just don't go smaller. So there are two knitting needles. Now for other things we'll need a tapestry needle and some waste yarn, and that's to hold the thumb stitches. You can also use a stitch holder if you have one of those and would prefer that. We'll just need one stitch marker. We'll need a cable needle and a pair of scissors to break our yarn. Now lastly, the yarn I'll be using here, this is Malabrigo worsted yarn in color 608. And basically for the worsted weight yarns, you're looking for something that's 200 yards or around there for 100 grams. So you'll see this one's 210 yards for 100 grams. And you're gonna need basically one skein of this because we're gonna use basically around like 150 to 170 yards. So just make sure if you buy a 100-gram skein or ball of yarn at your local craft store, you're gonna use that full thing. But if you're buying the 50-gram basically measurements, you're gonna want two of those. So now that I've shown you all the materials we're using, let's get to casting on. Now I'm going to demonstrate the long tail cast on method. So the way I have my yarn divided up in front of me is I have this bunch of yarn over here, which is about a yard, and this is what I'm going to refer to as my tail. And then I have the ball of yarn in the back, which can also be called the working yarn. So I'm going to want to create a slip knot right in the middle here. So the way I do that is, had some glitter on me, I lay the yarn over my hand, working yarn comes out the back, tail comes out the front, and then I grab onto it with my 3 bottom fingers. Now, using the working yarn, I'm going to take the yarn up over my pointer finger, down and around until I come back up to the top. Repeat that one more time, so go up, over the top, back up. And then finally go back down and grab that strand with your 3 fingers again. So basically you kind of, if you look at like the inside of your pointer finger, you have 3 lines here. So now I want to take this center or second strand and pull it up over the first strand Now I'm going to take the new second strand, pull that one up over the first strand, and now finally I'm going to grab onto the second strand, and while holding onto it, I'm going to pull it off my finger. So there's my slip knot. So now I can slide that onto my needle and pull on the tail, and it'll tighten right on there. So I have it on my needle with the working yarn coming out the back, tail coming out the front. I now have the slip knot on my needle and I'm ready to begin the long tail cast on. So I'm going to grab both strands with my bottom 3 fingers, and now I'm going to take my pointer finger and my thumb and put it in between the 2 strands. So basically I'm taking my pointer finger and pushing back on the working yarn, and I'm taking my thumb and pushing it towards myself on the tail. It does also help if you hold that slip knot in place with your index finger of your other hand. So now that we're holding the yarn like that, we're going to want to angle our hand upwards. So basically my palm is now facing the ceiling. And to do the long tail cast on, first you're going to take the knitting needle towards yourself and under the cross that's around your thumb, and then come up in between those 2 strands. Now go back towards your pointer finger, and then basically go down the center of your pointer finger in between the strands. That's what it looks like. But really we're just going over that top strand, picking it up, and then bringing it back through that loop around our thumb, and then releasing with our thumb. So that's the first one, or really our second cast on stitch, because the slip knot does count. And now again, if you need a reset, you just have your index finger pushing back on the working yarn, your thumb pushing towards yourself on the tail, angle your palm up towards the ceiling, and to show it to you one more time, you take the knitting needle, go underneath the yarn wrapped around your thumb, and then up in between the middle, go back towards your pointer finger, up over and around that strand of yarn, pick it up, and then come back through the loop on your thumb, and then release with your thumb again. So now I have 3 stitches cast on, so I'm going to continue doing this until I have 36 stitches cast on. I've just finished casting on my 36 stitches using the long tail method, and basically when you finish the long tail method, your needle point is going to be pointing left. The other thing that I did real quick is I trimmed my tail a little bit just so that I didn't accidentally knit with it. So now I'm going to take my needle point and I'm going to switch it so it's pointing right. And I'm going to take all these stitches and slide them to the middle of my cord. Now we're going to want to divide them in half. So I'm going to count 18 stitches and then hold my finger there. And you should have 18 on the other side too, so I'm just going to double check that. Okay, and I do. So now that I'm right in that middle, I'm going to grab the cord there and basically fold the needle over on itself and pull through. So when you do that, you're going to want to keep on going until basically you end up with all the stitches up on the needles. And now real quick, you're going to want to make sure it isn't twisted. So you can see how on the side, if I can get that to focus, my 2 bars are laying flat, so they aren't twisted over each other. So that means I'm not twisted there. And then all of my cast on edge is facing down. Now when you knit magic loop, the main thing that you need to make sure every round is that your working yarn is coming out the back needle. So the back needle is going to be what appears to be the top needle on your screen, because essentially you hold the 2 needles parallel to each other, kind of like if this was a flat surface. So I have 1 needle that's further away from me and 1 needle that's closer to me. So I refer to the one that's further away, or at the top of your screen, is the back needle. The one closest to me is the front needle. So you always want your working yarn coming out of the back needle. So the way I'm going to accomplish this to start is I'm just going to flip it. So I basically just took it like up over. And now basically you don't want all these cast on edges up, so I'm going to twist all my cast ons back down again. So now I'm all ready to start with my working yarn coming out the back needle. And the first thing the pattern asks us to do is knit some ribbing. So you always pull through or pull out to begin knitting with the needle that has the working yarn attached to it, and then you knit into the needle that does not have the working yarn attached to it. So first, I'm just going to take that free needle and knit 2 to begin the ribbing. Then purl 2. So I'm going to bring the yarn to the front and purl 2. And I'm going to continue doing this knit 2, purl 2 all the way across that front needle. Now finally finishing with that knit 2. So now you basically end up with the working yarn is attached to one needle, and then you just have this other free needle. So what you want to do after going across each needle is you want to flip it again so that the needle point is pointing towards the right, and then put that other needle back in the work. So basically slide it back in there. Get all your stitches facing down. Sorry, I didn't mean to shake that. So basically your work is coming out the bottom. And now again, we have the working yarn coming out the back and the unworked stitches in the front. So now that we've gone across that one needle, we've only done half the stitches in this round, so we need to go across the other needle and finish it. We're gonna need to continue the ribbing. So I just did a knit 2, so on this side I'm gonna start with a purl 2. So I'm gonna pull through the back needle to begin working with that one, because that's the one with the working yarn attached to it, and knit into, or in this case, purl into, the one that doesn't have the working yarn attached to it. I'm going to start with the purl 2, and then continue doing the ribbing across this half of the work. And now you should finish this one with a purl 2. And now basically you can see this is where our tail comes out, so that's our beginning of the round. And you'll notice on the first few rounds or so, you'll have this big bar that forms. That's all right, as we keep on going up, it'll begin to tighten. So now again, I'm gonna turn my needle so that it's pointing towards the right. The one with the working yarn is gonna be in the back. I'm putting in that other knitting needle, so sliding it back onto the stitches. With my needle tips pointed towards the right again, I'm ready to begin my second round. So again, I'm just going to repeat that same process. The working yarn's coming out the back, so that's the needle I'm going to pull through and begin knitting into the front. And you'll see whenever I do the knit stitches, I always make sure that basically the working yarn is coming out from on top of the needle, and if I'm purling, it's coming out from below. Just so that I don't end up with basically like an extra twist over the needle in the beginning of each round. So I'm going to knit 2, purl 2. And I'm going to keep on doing this magic loop round of knit 2, purl 2 ribbing until this ribbing measures 4 inches from the cast on edge. So basically you can just do that from the very bottom edge, and then I usually do basically until just about the bottom of the needle, and that'll be where I measure the 4 inches to. I've now finished knitting my 4 inches of ribbing, and I'm ready to switch my needle size. So since I am only increasing one needle size, and my needles are interchangeable, I could just take these needles off and then add on my US 8s. But just in case anyone watching this doesn't have the interchangeable kind, I'm going to show how I switch my needle sizes using magic loop. So basically what I do is just now, instead of pulling through the back one and knitting across with that, I'm just going to take my new needle, or my US 8, and I'm just going to knit one round with that. So first I'm going to knit across this first needle. Now that I've gone across that first side, basically it's like half my work's on one set of circular needles and half my work's on the other. So now what you want to do is you want to pull basically the original set through so it goes up to the other needle point. So now you can think of it as you've like your US 8 pointing left and your US 7 pointing left. Now I'm going to turn my work and I'm going to pull the back one through, so my US 8 through, and I'm going to begin knitting across the front side, or the other side now that I haven't gone across yet. And once I go across this side, then we'll be fully on the US 8s. I'm now on my larger needle size and set back up for magic loop so it looks exactly the same. And my next round is going to be an increase round. So that's going to be the knit 1, make 1 left, knit 16, make 1 right across the front, and then basically repeat the same thing on the other side of the needle. So we're going to increase 2 stitches on the first side, 2 stitches on the opposite side. First I'm going to knit 1. Then a make 1 left is where you insert your needle point under the bar in between the stitch you just worked and the one you're about to work. So you can see there's those horizontal bars. You go from front to back under that bar, and then you knit into the back of the loop. So it's a make 1 left. I'm going to knit 16. Now basically there's one more stitch left to work, so I'm going to do my make 1 right in between here. So again, you can see the little bar down below. And now for a make 1 right, you're going to insert your left needle point from back to front under that, and then you're going to knit into the front of that loop. Then knit the final stitch. We're going to turn our work and repeat the same steps again. So to show you those one more time, we're going to knit 1, make 1 left, so we pick up the bar between the one we just worked and the one we're about to work, use our left needle point from front to back. Then we're going to knit into the back of that loop. Knit 16. Now we're going to do a make 1 right. So again, you see the bar between the one I just worked and the one I'm about to work. So now we go from back to front with our left needle point, and then we knit into the front of that loop. And then knit the final stitch. Perfect. So I just did the 1 round of increases. After the increase row, the next portion of the pattern is written kind of like in a table format. And the reason I selected that is because for these next set of rows, there's going to be 2 different steps happening. So first we're going to be increasing for the thumb, and then second we're going to be cabling. And because these 2 steps happen sometimes on the same row, sometimes on different rows, I wrote it out row by row so that you know exactly on this row or round, you know exactly which pattern you're supposed to be working, if it's one, the other, or both. So the first thing to note about the written instructions is that every line is for 1 round. So if it says do a thumb increase at the beginning, so it says something about make 1 left and make 1 right, and then a cable, you always have to knit across this back needle. Because you can kind of think about this as kind of like the front of our mitten, and then this is the inside where your hand would be, or your palm. So that side will just be completely flat, and then all of our patterning will be on the outside. So for an example, I'm going to show you this first row that's in the pattern, because this incorporates both of the two things that are just going to be worked. So first we're going to have a thumb increase, and then we're also going to have one of the cable patterns. Starting off, we have a make one left. So basically you're going to want the bar in between the previous needle and the one you're about to work at the beginning of the round. So we're going to pick that up with the left needle from front to back, and then knit into the back of that loop. Can be a little trickier to get in there on this first stitch. So there's my make one left, knit two, then make one right. So here we're going to go back to front underneath the bar, and then knit into the front. And now, since this is the first time we did the increases, we don't have our stitch marker there yet, so we're going to place our stitch marker. Then it says knit 4, now it says cable 10, and the reason it's the number 10 is because there's 10 stitches total involved in this cable. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cable needle and slip 5 stitches from my left needle onto the cable needle, hold it in the front of my work. I'm going to knit 5 stitches from my left needle, and now I'm going to knit the 5 stitches from my cable needle. And now it says to knit the remaining of the round. So that includes these remaining 4 stitches as well as all the stitches on the other side. So this row has incorporated 2 different things. First we have the thumb increases, and then we have the cable pattern. So now what you want to do as you continue knitting the mitten is you want to just look at what it tells you to do each row and then do whatever pattern that is. And I'm going to continue working the mitten and then come back and show you what it looks like once I finish row 18. Because row 18, after we finish that one, is when we're going to place our thumb stitches onto waste yarn. So again, just to remind you one more time, that whenever it says the instructions for one row or one round, that incorporates both needles. So for example, round 2 says knit. So you want to knit all the way across the first needle and knit all the way across the second needle, and that's one round. I've now reached row 18 and I'm ready to put these thumb stitches onto waste yarn. So again, here you can use either waste yarn or you can use a stitch holder. I'm going to take my tapestry needle with some yarn attached to it, and I'm just going to slip purlwise all the stitches up until that stitch marker onto the yarn. Then just pull your needle through a little bit so that it kind of sits in the middle of the yarn. And what I like to do then is just tie a little bow with these 2 ends. So that way I can untie it later and it just holds these off to the side. So after I've placed my stitches on waste yarn, I need to cast on 1 stitch. So the way I'm going to cast on is I'm just going to cast it onto the left needle and then slide it over to the right one, because it can be a little tricky to cast on right to the right needle at the beginning of a row. So I take my working yarn, go underneath that left needle, up over the top, then hold that yarn loosely over to the left side. Now I'm just gonna take that twist basically that I've created and just slide that right onto my right needle. So that's the 1 stitch I've created. Now just take your working yarn and put it back to the back again so we can start knitting. And now I'm just going to start knitting right across that row. And you want to make sure to pull that first stitch a little tighter, just so that we don't end up with too big of a bar in between the two sides. So now I'm going to continue working across that row and continue following the pattern until I reach those decreases at the top of the mitten. The one thing to note here is that the main change we've made is now we aren't going to be doing the thumb increases anymore. We're just going to be cabling. And on rows where it does call for a cable or a C10, we're going to be doing knit 5, cable 10, and then knit 4 on the other side. So just make sure you're always splitting it up, so it's the 5 and then the 4. I've now finished working the portion of that pattern that was written up in the list, and now I'm ready to begin the decreases at the top of the mitten. So this one is my left mitten, so we'll be following those instructions. And so the main thing to note here is that on this front needle, I have 5 stitches, then I cable 10, and then I have 4 stitches after the cable. So I have 19 stitches on my front needle, but I have 20 stitches all the way across my back needle. So the way I'm going to decrease for this first round is I'm going to decrease at the beginning of the front needle, knit all the way across, turn my work, and then decrease on both sides of the back. So that way I'll have 18 stitches on the front and 18 stitches on the back once I'm complete this round. To start this first decrease round, I'm going to knit 1, then I'm going to do a slip slip knit, so I'm going to slip 2 stitches as if to knit them, then knit them together through the back loop. Continue knitting all the way across this front. Turn my work. I'm going to knit 1 on this back side, do a slip slip knit, work until there are 3 stitches remaining. Do a knit 2 together, which is just where you place your needle through 2 stitches at one time as if you're going to knit them. Wrap your yarn around and pull through, and then I'm going to knit the final stitch. So that one's my first decrease round on my left mitten. So on the right mitten, you would do essentially the same thing, just you decrease across the front on the opposite side where you had the 5 stitches instead. So on the next decrease round, I'm going to decrease on both sides and cable in the middle. I'm going to knit 1, do a slip slip knit, knit 1, and now I'm going to do the cabling. I'm going to take my cable needle, pick up 5 stitches, hold them in the front, knit the next 5 stitches, knit my 5 stitches from the cable needle, knit 1. Now we're going to do a knit 2 together, and then finally knit the final stitch. Turn our work. And on this side, I'm just going to repeat those same 2 decreases again. So I'm going to slip slip knit, knit across to the other side, 3 stitches remaining, and then knit 2 together. And now on both sides, that was my final cable across the front side. So now on both sides, I'm just going to continue decreasing, a slip slip knit, and then a knit 2 together at the end, until there are 8 stitches remaining on each of the needles, so 16 stitches total. I've now finished all my decrease rounds and I'm ready to begin the Kitchener stitch to cast off. So what I've done is I've cut my tail and it's about an 18-inch tail that I have. And I've just threaded a tapestry needle with it. And now Kitchener stitch has two setup rounds, or two setup stitches more. So the first setup stitch is you're going to go through the first stitch on the front needle as if you're going to purl, but leave that stitch on the needle. And now you want to go through the first stitch on the back needle as if you're going to knit. And when you go to that back needle, you want to make sure you're going underneath that front needle. So those are our two setup stitches. So now that we've done those two, we're going to start the Kitchener stitch repeat, which is 4 steps. So the first step is to go through the first stitch on the front needle as if you're going to knit it. Now slide that stitch off the front needle. Now go to the new first stitch on the front needle as if you're going to purl. Slide your tapestry needle through, but leave that stitch on the needle. Now again, going underneath that front needle to the first stitch on the back needle, go through that front stitch, or first stitch on the back needle as if to purl, and now slide that one off of the needle. The final stitch is to go through the new first stitch on the back needle as if you're going to knit, and leave that one on the needle. So now once I finish a repeat, I just like to tug on this a little bit and just straighten up everything over here. So now I'll show you the repeat one more time. So I'm going to go into the first stitch on the front needle as if to knit, and then slide that stitch off my needle. Now I'm going to go into the new first stitch on the front needle as if to purl, and this time I'm going to leave that stitch on the needle. Now I'm going to go to the first stitch on the back needle as if to purl, slide that stitch off the needle, and now I'm going to go into the new first stitch on the back needle as if to knit, leave that stitch on the needle. So now I'm going to continue repeating this across the row, and eventually you'll end up with the situation where you can't do Kitchener stitch completely anymore. So then what I do is I basically just thread it through knitwise on the last stitch and then go through purlwise on the last stitch on the second needle, and that way it just kind of casts off those last two, even though you can't do the complete Kitchener stitch. So now I'll just have a screen that has the written directions to that, so everyone can complete their Kitchener stitch. So to show you what I mean there, I basically just have one stitch left on my front needle, one stitch left on my back needle, and I just did the knit through the back loop and leave it on. So now I'm going to knit through the first loop on the front needle, slide that one off, so that's like my stitch, step 1. Now I can't do a step 2, so I'm just going to skip to step 3, purl through the last stitch on my back needle, slide it off. And now what I'll do is I'll just thread this tail onto the inside of my work, and then I'll weave that one in. That's what the Kitchener stitch looks like at the top of the mitten. So the final step on these mittens is going to be to pick up these stitches and then knit the thumb. So I always start with my thumb pointing towards the left, and then regardless of whether this is the left or right mitten, and I go through and I pick up all the stitches. So here, basically what you do is you follow along the waste yarn and you just pick up each of those. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up 6, because I have a total of 12 here. So I'm going to pick up 6, pull my needle through, and now turn my mitten and pick up the 6 on the other side. So that way I'm basically just dividing for magic loop. And sometimes these last two can be tricky. So what you want to do is you want to pull upwards on that string. So right now I have 4 on my needle, and I can see that the white strand goes underneath one bump right there. So that's one of them. So now I've got that one, and now I need to get that last one, which is that little bump right there. So now I have this last one in here that's really quite tight. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a tapestry needle, and I'm gonna pick that one up, and then I'm gonna slide it onto my needle. And the reason that one gets so tight is because it's actually connected, the bar is connected to the mitten, so it's basically just getting pulled along that bar. So once I have it picked up, I'm just gonna slide it onto my needle. So now you should have 12 stitches total, 6 stitches on each needle. And you are able to now pull out this waste yarn. So to begin knitting, magic loop, of course we want our needle points towards the right. And I'm gonna rejoin my yarn, pull through my back needle to start knitting with that one. And basically how I rejoin my yarn here is I actually just lay it right over the needle and then knit through. So you can see I just kind of have a tail here. So later on we'll use this tail to close up any gaps that forms between the thumb and the mitten. So just leave your tail there and we'll come back for it later. But I'm gonna knit across this front needle. Turn my work and knit across the back needle. And now once you knit across this back needle, you're going to want to pick up a stitch that's attached to the mitten. And the reason for this is that you can get a hole that forms in between the thumb and the mitten, right in that area. So to try and prevent that, you can pick up stitches. So first I'm going to tuck my tail into the mitten. And now I'm going to turn my work. So basically I have the work I just knit across on the back and it's still attached to the needle. And using my free needle, I'm going to pick up actually 2 different bars and then knit them together. So I like to pick basically the bar above where this one goes in. So you can see this goes in right underneath that loop. So I would probably pick like this one right here. And then on the other side, there's the bar that goes into the mitten. So I'm going to pick probably this one right here. And now I want to knit these 2 together. So I'm going to return my work and knit these 2 stitches together. So now you'll have 6 stitches on your front needle, 7 stitches on your back needle, but we'll correct that as we go around the next round. So I'm going to knit across my first needle, turn my work, and now across this needle, I'm going to knit until there are 2 stitches remaining, and then I'm going to knit those last 2 together. That way I get back down to having 6 on each needle. Okay, so now I'm going to continue knitting until when I try on the mitten, it's just about to the top of my thumb. So you can just slide this over to the cord a little bit. And now you can try on your mitten. And basically, you're going to want to wait until it's like almost at the very top, because then we'll do our final decrease round and then cast off. Once you knit your thumb to the length you'd like it to be, so for me this is about 1 1/4 inches, we're going to do our decrease round. So to do the decrease round, I'm just going to knit 2 together all the way across. So I should end up with 3 stitches on my front needle, 3 stitches on my back needle. Once you have the 6 stitches remaining, I'm gonna break my yarn, and here you don't need a very long tail. I usually just go with, it's probably about 8 inches. I'm gonna thread my tapestry needle. And now I wanna weave my tapestry needle through the remaining stitches. So the way I do that is I always start at basically the next stitch I would have knit. So basically this is the one I just knit, so I would start knitting on this one. So I'm just gonna go through each one of these stitches. You can go through one at a time or slide your tapestry needle through a couple, however you prefer. And once you go through them, you can slide them off the needle. Now pull that tight. And now again, I'm going to thread this to the inside of my mitten and then weave in that end. So this is my finished left-hand mitten. So essentially, for the right-hand mitten, we're going to follow all the same steps up through that initial first increase. But then once we get to that point, the instructions are going to change a little bit, because instead of increasing for the thumb on the right-hand side, we're going to be increasing for the thumb on the left-hand side. So once you get up to that point, the next clip will show you how to begin increasing on the opposite side. So just to show you this first row, well, first I should explain, I've cast on using the long tail cast on method, did knit 2 purl 2 ribbing for 4 inches, increased my needle size during that one knit round, then done my increase round. So basically I'm back at the first row or round of the chart. So the first step is going to be to knit 4, now cable 10, and I'm going to cable both the mittens in the same direction. So I'm going to put 5 on my cable needle, hold them in the front, knit 5 from my left needle, knit 5 from that cable needle, and if you wanted to cable this mitten in the opposite direction, you would just hold those 5 stitches on the cable needle in the back instead of the front. Now I'm going to knit 4, place my stitch holder for my thumb increases. I'm going to do a make 1 left, knit 2, and now do a make 1 right. So now we're just doing it basically in between the side we just worked and the one we're about to work. You just want to find that bar again. And then always knit across the second half of the stitches. So now I'm going to continue knitting until I reach that thumb increase again, so row 18, and I'll show you how to place these stitches onto waste yarn and how to add that 1 cast on stitch. For the second mitten, when I put these stitches on waste yarn and cast on this stitch, I'm going to do it in kind of like a slightly different order. So first I'm going to knit across, then I'm going to place all these stitches on waste yarn, then I'm going to cast on 1 stitch, turn my work, and keep on working. So to show you that, knit across, so I'm going to take off my stitch marker, slide each of those stitches onto my tapestry needle and waste yarn, now I want to cast on 1 stitch at the end of that row, so I'm going to take my yarn, lay it over my hand, so basically the yarn attached to the work is coming out the top, the working yarn's coming out the back. Grab onto it with my 3 fingers, pointer finger goes up in front of the strand, then down behind the strand. So you get 1 loop around your finger, kind of like that half loop. Then slide that stitch onto your needle. So there's our cast on one. So now we can turn our work and continue knitting across the other side. And now when we're working that cable stitch, make sure you're paying attention to how many stitches are before and after that C10, because there's going to be an uneven number, just like the other mitten. Here's the right mitten that I've just finished up. So again, after I showed you this increase in cable method down at the bottom, the only other difference that I did was up top, instead of decreasing at the beginning of that first needle, I decreased at the end of the first needle. And then I've just picked up the thumb the same way I described on my previous knitting and then knit them to the same length. So down in the description box below, you're going to find the full written version of this pattern. And you'll also find the video breakpoints to each individual step. So that way if you want to fast forward or rewind, you can do that to find a specific location. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and if you'd like to see more videos by me, please subscribe.